Before we begin this video, I'd like to point out that we're trying out new narrators and we're increasing our staff on the Curves team to cover a greater amount of subjects and get videos out faster. For instance, we have a completely new series coming out on art and its representations of beauty, which is going to be done by a narrator other than me.
The human face is a complex trait composed of distinct features, i.e., eyes, nose, chin, and mouth, whose size, shape, and composition are clearly heritable. In fact, studies on twins have shown that approximately 75% of the face's composition is genetically influenced, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's inherited as mutations, and disruptions also come into play. Slight variations of genes can essentially affect every aspect of the facial morphology of a human, and so an endless possible combination can virtually form infinite facial forms with varied facial structures. It has been hypothesized that human faces are subject to more variations than the faces of other species or even other parts of our body. Nevertheless, from the strong facial resemblances that exist among members of a family, it is evident that genetics play a vital role in producing attractive faces. On the other hand, the fact that facial malformations and syndromes can be heritably passed down from parent to offspring provides further proof that genetics does indeed play a critical role in shaping the human face. It has been identified through a study by Sugrasulis and colleagues which aspects of our face are most and least heritable. The study utilized high-resolution, three-dimensional facial models of a cohort of 952 twins. The unique algorithm then identified thousands of landmarks across the face and automatically established point-wise correspondence to measure differences. These landmarks then enabled the researchers to accurately define facial geometry in fine detail, with curvature measurements thus revealing accurate heritability maps of the human face. From these results, the researchers found strong heritability in the mental region, chin, philtrum, upper lip, nasal tip and nasion, inner eye corners, and maxilla, upper jaw. Of these findings, the maxilla is one of the most significant aspects for facial beauty, as it influences forward growth and provides support for a multitude of facial components, where without proper development, common cosmetic flaws like scleral show. Jaw recession and paranasal hollowing become more apparent. Also using a multivariate analysis, the researchers found heritability in the nasolabial folds, smile lines, and under eye regions, both of which, again, are regions influenced by maxillary forward growth. Due to the advancement and application of high-throughput genomic technologies in the last 2 decades, there has been a dramatic increase in gene discovery for all craniofacial phenotypes. Genome-wide association studies, GWAS, conducted since 2005, have presented evidence that common traits and diseases are affected by common DNA sequence variants. Several genome-wide association studies, GWAS, have each identified 25 of the loci associated with a small number of facial traits. There is a ridiculously long list of genes and their facial influences summarized in this table here, from Stephen et al.'s Facial Genetics, a brief overview, which we've gotten permission to reproduce over at the Curves website. The most infamous example of this is the Habsburg jaw, where a series of incestuous marriages down the European family tree over 3 centuries led to the offspring developing a characteristically bad mandibular prognathism or underbite. From this image, it's very clear to see how a disruption in normal jaw alignment, especially at the maxilla, leads to distinctly droopy, rounded eyes, a heavy plunging nose, and a pointed chin, all of which fall in the mentioned heritable regions from the previous study. In reality, these facial deformities come about often as a failure in only a small handful of genes, for instance in the case of children with cleft palate. By comparing the children with this deformity to their unaffected relatives, Millet et al. 2014 found that the affected face had reduced facial convexity, increased chin protrusion, increased lower facial height, and thinner, protruded lips with larger foreheads. All of these genes are relevant for forming facial growth and telling the cells to replicate by how much and for how long, and these shared genetic pathways can get mixed up even when it's not inherited. By contrast, there are also features that aren't influenced by your inherited genes, and instead by the surrounding environment. There's an ongoing theory supported by a body of evidence that human noses are adapted to their environment by race and ethnicity. We're actually working on a full video for the topic, and if you're enjoying the content so far, there's no reason to not subscribe now to catch that video too. In short, ethnicities in colder climates have smaller, sharper noses, while those in hotter ones have wider, flatter noses in an effort to maximize airflow when hunting. Fetal alcohol syndrome also produces characteristic features right from birth, and there's an endless number of pregnancy medications, such as hydantoin, that can produce abnormal features. From Hoyne and colleagues' recommendations on fetal alcohol diagnosis, the very next stage is to assess the patient's face, because it's that influential on the face. This process involves taking head circumference measurements, which are often bigger than average, having a smooth philtrum, thin lips, and beady eyes. In a GWAS conducted by Fan Liu et al., facial features were phenotyped according to landmark data retrieved from 2D portrait photos and 3D magnetic resonance images, MRIs. 5 independent genetic loci, so a small part of an individual chromosome, were identified from this study, which was related to different facial phenotypes. This implied the involvement of candidate genes in the determination of the human face. 3 of these candidate genes have been identified in earlier studies in relation to craniofacial development and disease in vertebrates. The remaining 2 genes are probable new factors in the molecular networks that guide facial development. These genes likely have little relevance to you, but the recurrence of one gene, PAX3, in facial abnormalities and unique facial features is crucial in forensic profiling. To date, it's understood that PAX3 influences the prominence of the nasal bridge, which itself is a unique facial trait for some. Take Tibetan model Sunaina, who is regarded for her wide nasal bridge and attractive proportions in the industry. Someone with a PAX3 mutation would be limited to only a handful of people in the world with a feature as distinct as hers, making them easy to identify. Keating et al., 2013, performed a similar test, predicting eye color, hair color, and ancestry with moderate accuracy. But that's currently not good enough for court testimonials. Also check out the Ku's facial analysis of Sunaina and her otherworldly features after this. There are a few takeaways from gene research. Firstly, since we lack insight into the effect of genes on facial morphogenesis, gene mapping studies should be conducted so that developmental and cell biologists have more information on which genes to focus on to improve face aesthetic and function. That being said, heritability studies still show that a large part of your facial attraction is still determined by your partner's genetics, some of which are completely out of one's control, such as fetal alcohol syndrome by a negligent mother. However, it shouldn't be taken as the cause of one's aesthetic misfortunes, as orthodontists have shown that facial development is still largely dependent on upbringing, with the most relatable example being mouth breathing, which causes a host of serious facial issues. It would seem that genetics sets the natural bar for how attractive one's face can be, with predetermined features and facial lengths, but lifestyle choices and orthodontic habitus determine if that potential can even be reached. To some extent, lifestyle can also influence proportions, as explained in the diet and teeth video, where tougher, traditional diets led to more handsome jaw widths. With the unprecedented progress in plastic surgery, one's genetic potential matters less and less, which goes against the predictions Gattaca made for our dystopian future. Special thanks to Dr. Sony Sherpa for helping with this video.